The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. It's Monday, the 30th of June, 2025. Last day of June. That means the last day of our Gardasil stories. We do have many more that we could be playing throughout the year, but we are going to switch tomorrow in July to the unvaccinated stories to lift the mood for July. So we have a packed show for you today. I'm going to bring on Veya's mother in a minute, and we're going to talk about Veya's fight for life. It's a very important story. Then we're going to go to talk about the ACIP. Let's break that down with Mack, Rosenberg, our general counsel at CHD, and Karl Jablonowski from our science department. Then we're going to go to Mothers to Be. They have an important message for you. And then we're going to have final Gardasil story of the month. So let's bring on Veya's mum, Krystal. Krystal, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So your beautiful daughter is 18 months old and has been in hospital for all of her life. Talk us through the medical history and why we are where we are today.
Yeah, so Veya was born with Down syndrome, and I learned about that while I was pregnant with her. And I also learned that she had a cardiac defect, which she has an ABSD cardiac defect, which is common for children with Down syndrome. So we knew prior to having her that we would have a bit of a medical journey with her, and she would require open heart surgery to repair that. Which, talking to our social worker as we were preparing for her birth, she expressed to us that, at best, these children will be about 2 weeks in hospital, at worst, maybe a month. And here we are 18 months later. What was supposed to kind of be like a straightforward medical journey with the open heart surgery has kind of turned into something that feels a bit like a nightmare. And she's now become a medically complex child with Down syndrome.
And Krystal, when did you notice that your daughter potentially wasn't getting the care that she should have got, maybe if she didn't have Down syndrome?
Yeah. So the start of her journey, I didn't question that at all. We were transferred to Toronto Sick Kids Hospital here in Ontario, Canada, and we had a great cardiac team. Veya was really, really sick. She was in heart failure. She had pulmonary hypertension. So it made it really tricky to go forward with an open heart surgery, but it just took a couple of the doctors who wanted to take that chance and that risk with her and try to repair it. And then 3.5 weeks post-op, she developed problems with her liver. And we spent from July of last year up into January of this year trying to investigate and figure out what this liver disease was or wasn't. And so that's why we've been in there for 18 months. Once we had done a whole bunch of different testings and procedures and genetic testings, and none of it worked, she went for a liver surgery in December to kind of rework her bile ducts to see if it could help solve the issue. It didn't. The only treatment option left was a transplant. And at that point, they decided that's where they drew the line in the sand, and they weren't going to continue treating her, and they denied her a liver transplant. So I would say from the end of January of this year till now, her care has completely declined.
So they denied her this new liver transplant because what's their reasoning? I mean, would they have done that with a child? I'm sorry to push you, but I feel like our children with special needs do get second-rate treatment compared to others.
Oh, for sure. The unit that she typically sits in is their general peds unit. And in that unit, they deal with every medically complex child you can think of. And even speaking with them, and seeing them have to consult with all the different specialty teams to try to get them up to their unit to check on their kids, it's, for poor choice of words, it's like pulling teeth from a dead cow. Like, it's so hard to get them to come by, especially when they raise concerns. So I do believe that Veya's disability has influenced their decision-making. When we sat down for that meeting, it was a very quick meeting. A lot of people actually apologized for how that meeting went because there was no room left for us to ask questions. They basically said that, no, she is too weak to receive a liver transplant. And when I had asked them, like, okay, what kind of goals would you want to see her achieve in order to be reconsidered? They didn't want to answer that. They kind of explained it away, saying, if she goes for a liver transplant, it's going to mean so many more outpatient appointments for you. And I challenged it, saying, well, we already have so many outpatient appointments as it is. Like, getting a liver transplant isn't really going to change that reality for me. And then they pushed back by saying, well, we have to think of the donor, because for Veya, she needs a live donor. And they said, we don't want to put them through something if we don't feel like it would be successful. And I said, well, if her dad or I are match, or anybody in the family that is, eager to give Veya a piece of their liver, that's something us as consenting adults would be happy to take that risk, whether it worked or not. So I expressed that I didn't feel like it was fair for them to make that decision for us. And that was that. And after that meeting ended, I had asked them, like, would you reconsider her? Like, you must deny kids all the time. And they said it'd be a pretty slim chance to none that they would change their minds on it. And I said, well, how? Because no one has a crystal ball. No one can see, like, if Veya is going to regain her strength. Their biggest thing is she has lived her whole life in a hospital, and therefore she's fragile. And the fact that she caught RSV after her liver surgery that she had in December, to them, that made her look so weak. And I felt like I always had to pull up her resume and explain, like, how strong and resilient of a child she is, because I'm like, need I remind you, when she went for cardiac surgery, her lungs were bleeding. She had pulmonary hemorrhaging. She had severe pulmonary hypertension, and she just got over ventilator associated pneumonia. I said, and they still sent her in for a 10-hour open heart surgery, expecting to put her on ECMO. This is why I'm fine as her mom to take that chance to see her through a liver transplant, because I feel like she could do it. But that was that. And then we met with our quality of life team. They're known as PACT. And I had asked one specific doctor on there, I said, I can't help but shake this feeling that part of their decision-making is based on Veya's Down syndrome. And I said, was that part of the discussion? Because he had sat in on that meeting, and he said, Mom, I think you know the answer to that deep down in your heart. And I said, well, I know you can't say yes or no, but you pretty much just confirmed that they did take into consideration her Down syndrome.
Krystal, it's just appalling to me. Looking at those images of her, she's so sweet and like cuddling that swan or whatever. As a mother, because she's your baby, explain how the emotions that you're going through, because we know us as mothers will do everything to fight for our beautiful babies, and also describe her character.
Yeah, no, you know what? I think this is where I was shocked to hear that they were denying her, because for the first time on this long medical journey, it felt like a team that didn't see Veya for Veya, right? It's our cardiac team saw her sweetness and saw her strength. Our Gen Peds team saw the same thing. Whether you took care of Veya or not inside this hospital, everybody knew her. And she definitely was a fan favorite for a while. We were often seen on their social media. We got to attend a lot of different events together, and all of that changed once we were denied transplant and I started speaking out and asking more questions. Then it was, we are trying to hide you. So it is hard. I don't love that I feel like I have to prove her value and her worth. She shouldn't have to prove anything to anybody. And I knew that there would be a level of advocating. I just didn't realize it would be to this extent. I don't think that's necessary. I know what it's like to have a team of really amazing doctors and nurses that can see her on a road to recovery. And that makes all the world of a difference, because she does thrive. But when you're providing care through the lens of believing that her life is limited and, she's not going to add much to society, she's not going to have a job, that you would want her to have, things like that, your care is going to match that. And so that's what's happened, is now that we have needed the PICU team for quite a while of 2025, they operate through that lens because they know that transplant team has said no. So it's just been this relentless battle of having to almost prove her worth and value to everybody. And it's hard too, because we have 3 other kids. So they have definitely fallen to the back burner because we don't live close to this hospital. So often I'm spending Monday to Friday down there, and my husband's at home with them. And then him and I will swap out on weekends. And it got to a point at the very end that Veya just wasn't safe to be on her own. So we had to have ourselves or switch out with family and friends or different volunteers to keep an eye on her too, because the care became so neglectful, but also she was overdosed with potassium. So things just felt very unsafe.
So that I would be really interested to see her medical records or send it to our medical team. I mean, mind me asking, are they vaccinating her while she's in there as well?
So the thing that has kind of protected her from that is because she is a cardiac kid. So there is a schedule of like when you are allowed to receive them, when you're not. We haven't actually run into too much of an issue with the vaccinations because she's followed by immunology, and they did a whole workup on her immune system. And they said to us that they didn't feel comfortable with Veya receiving live vaccines, which I didn't feel comfortable with either. So I was happy that that was acknowledged. There was only probably one point in this journey that I encountered a doctor really pushing to get her caught up on all the ones that weren't live. But Veya has never really given much of a clear picture, you know, because she always has so much going on. So I expressed my concerns that if we do this, we're not going to know what is, you know, a side effect from a vaccine versus what she's dealing with her liver or her lungs or her cardiac issues, right? So Veya has received like the RSV synergies, but I even said to them, I'm like, look how well that worked out for her because she ended up getting RSV anyways. Like it just proves my point that they don't protect against everything that you'd like them to.
Yeah, so she got the RSV vaccine, then got RSV.
Yeah. Right after her liver surgery, she went up to the gen surge floor to recover. And for 3 days, I was like, something sounds like it's grumbling in there. And they were like very dismissive about it, said, no, it's post anesthetic. I said, no, it's not, because she's had so many procedures with anesthesia. And she never sounds like this. So 3 days, RSV took a toll on her. And then it was kind of the eye of the storm for her. So we went back to PICU. And then a few days following that, she was overdosed with a lethal amount of potassium accidentally.
Oh, Krystal, I'm so sorry. Right. Well, so now what? So if they're not going to give the liver transplant, are you saying they're all but giving up on her?
Yeah, I would say that, because afterwards, I never saw my liver or GI team. From the end of January till now, when I saw them the day before we left, I never saw my specialist. And this is a specialist that I'm supposed to see every 2 weeks as outpatient. And a lot of times they will tell you we're following in the background, which you may or may not be doing. But if you have a family or a mom that's voicing concern and wants to talk to you about, you know, the status of her daughter's liver or where it's going or how to optimize it, you would kind of expect to see them come by, especially when you are sitting inpatient. You know, it's not like we're not in the hospital. So from January till now, I felt like I was just constantly begging somebody to help me optimize her liver. Like, what sort of options are there? We used to do a procedure called an ERCP that would go in and clean out Veya's bile duct, the main biliary tree, because her issue is, from everything we sent to pathology, everything about her liver is normal. It's just the bile itself doesn't flow. It's very thick. And so it builds up, and it's a source for infection constantly called cholangitis. And so I asked the team, can we do an ERCP? Like, her surgeon purposely put in a Hudson loop for us to be able to go in and clean that out from time to time. And then they said, for the first bit, no, there's no need to because there's no sludge. And I said, again, she always appears different on images. Once we go in and see it, we're like, whoa, there's a lot built up in here. I said, she's had 3 of them. She's done really well through them. I'm happy to kind of use that as an optimizing tool while she recovers so she can regain some strength for a transplant. And when I asked for it again a month or 2 later, they said the manufacturer stopped making them. So I felt like there's always these excuses. And I learned that they actually kind of lied about that, because I got confirmation from someone inside of Sick Kids that they had been performing ERCP procedures on kids that were the size of Veya and as young as Veya since we were denied ERCPs. I also did my own due diligence and called around to other Canadian hospitals to see if they have kits the size for Veya, if Sick Kids could reach out and ask them to send a kit, you know. So not seeing my team's efforts there felt like they didn't care. And they knew that we were reaching out for a second opinion too in the States. And now connecting with our liver team here at this other hospital that we've moved back to, their head of their liver team said it's their job to, you know, send Veya's case to all of the Canadian peds hospitals that do offer a pediatric transplant to get them to review it. And if no one in Canada is willing to do the transplant, you know, OHIP, like our health coverage can help us potentially get that taken care of in the States. But all of that, those bits of the conversation were missing. And so this has just been learned information from me talking and discussing about it openly. So I just feel like my team has really let us down in the sense of like letting us know what all of our options are if they're not willing to do something. So yeah.
Well, now, so Krystal, you have set a GoFundMe up. So let's put that up on the screen. If you get to come to the States, there'll be a new one. So we'll update all our viewers on that. If you can help, it's very expensive for them having to travel and the accommodation and everything. So if you can help, that'd be wonderful. I'm just going to bring Mack Rosenberg in for a second on this conversation, because my big question, having a 29-year-old injured, very injured son, and a great many of our viewers also have special needs children. Kim, do our children get treated differently? Because I feel they do. Little Veya with Down syndrome, Billy with autism, they get treated differently to someone who doesn't have these conditions.
No, and as a mom of a special needs child myself, it's Krystal, your family's situation is just heartbreaking to me. Veya is so sweet and so beautiful. But Polly, to your question, in 2019, the U.S. National Council on Disability actually did a report on discrimination against people with disabilities and organ transplants here in the U.S. And despite there being federal disability protection laws, and in some states, even specific laws that are supposed to protect people with disabilities who need organ transplants, we're still seeing discrimination. And it's really unfair when the discrimination has, when a person needs an organ transplant and that has nothing to do with their disability or their ability to be cared for afterwards. Veya certainly would have support from her family and all that post-transplant care that is needed. And it's very difficult, though, on the enforcement end of things, because you're often dealing with a really urgent situation, and to get courts to act quickly, as we know in many of our cases out there, can be a real challenge. So there's this disconnect between how quickly we can get the wheels of justice turning and getting the health care that these people need.
Krystal, how can people follow you? Thank you, Kim, for that. How can people follow you and keep up to date with your journey? And people, if you can't afford to donate, we totally understand. Prayers are very important. Veya needs all your prayers as well. But how can people follow you? I know you're on Instagram. Well, I'm following you on Instagram.
Yeah, I'm just on Instagram right now. I've contemplated moving to Facebook and that, but to be quite honest, it's a little overwhelming having too many social outlets. But Instagram is the main spot. It's where I can update in the moment. It's where we have the reels and the link to the GoFundMe and everything like that. So yeah, when we do get the other campaign going, there's going to be an option for me to provide daily updates on there too. So we'll kind of have two avenues, but yeah, on Instagram.
Well, please give Veya a massive kiss and hug from Children's Health Defence, and we'll be praying for you. And do come back and update us, because I know our viewers are going to get behind Veya. And anything we can do, please do contact us. And thank you for taking the time to share the story. Most important.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Krystal. All right, well, let's bring on Mack Rosenberg and Karl Jablonowski from our science department. Good morning, both of you. Thank you for being here.
Morning, Polly.
We're going to talk about ACIP, but I do want to start with this one thing. So it came to my attention, just on what a viewer wrote to me and said, some of the things that you talk about, Children's Health Defence, like we know, our viewers know, but when there was a friend sitting next to this particular viewer, she had no idea what we were talking about. So let's start with what even is ACIP, because we know, but that for that friend that doesn't. Kim.
Sure. So it's the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, and it's under the guise of the Centers for Disease Control. And these are the experts, the scientific experts, who are supposed to review the immunization schedule. They're supposed to review individual immunizations. They're supposed to review the science behind new proposed vaccines in deciding whether those vaccines are going to be added to the childhood schedule.
Okay, and now the other confusion, we'll just clear this up, is that people are writing to us, they're very angry about, some of the things like the RSV and various other things that we're going to talk about in a minute. And they're blaming Bobby. Now, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he doesn't sit on the ACIP. Can you just clear up how that all works? And we at Children's Health Defence don't work for any of those organisations for the millionth time.
That's 100% right. We don't sit on the ACIP. We don't work for CDC. We don't work for Health and Human Services. And Secretary Kennedy has appointment power with respect to ACIP, but he does not sit on that committee. He's not a decision maker on that committee. There are more than a dozen members of that committee from various scientific areas of scientific inquiry and expertise who do sit on that committee.
Right. Okay. So now I think we cleared all that up. Let's go into, let's start with you, Kim, because you had a comment there. And I actually would like to start with playing that, Lou, if you don't mind, and then Kim talking us through what happens.
Sure.
Just a second.
Children's Health Defense, a nonprofit dedicated to safeguarding children's health. And I'm here to address a critical issue, the misuse of ACIP's best practices guidelines by many states, including large states like California and New York, to recklessly restrict medical exemptions for school vaccine requirements where a treating physician has identified a risk. ACIP guidelines define contraindications and precautions broadly as conditions that increase risk of serious adverse reactions or compromise vaccine efficacy. ACIP has acknowledged these guidelines are not exhaustive and cannot define all reasons a child may need a medical exemption. Yet many states and schools are overriding treating physicians' clinical judgment, limiting exemptions to only those based on reasons explicitly listed in the non-exclusive tables, or going even further, accepting only anaphylaxis as a valid exemption, ignoring other serious risks or reasons that a vaccine might need to be deferred. With many new members in place, the ACIP must now act to prevent continued harm. I urge you to amend the best practices guidelines or issue clear public statement on your website affirming that CDC is not authorized to give medical advice about what an individual child may need to stay safe, that the guidelines are not exhaustive and cannot define every reason for a medical exemption, and only treating physicians using CDC guidance, other evidence, patient and family history, their clinical judgment, and any other information relevant to an individual child's health should determine if an exemption is warranted. Without your action, misapplication of the ACIP guidelines will continue to have devastating consequences. One of the many examples is the case of Sarah Doe, a 16-year-old from New York with acquired von Willebrand's disease, autoimmune hypersensitivity, unexplained periodic paralysis, and uncontrollable anaphylactic rash, a history of severe vaccine reactions. 6 licensed physicians certified that a third hepatitis B dose could endanger her life. Yet her school district rejected these exemptions, demanding anaphylaxis within 15 minutes of her last dose as the sole criteria. She desperately wanted to attend school and even tried to get vaccinated at a walk-in clinic after she was denied medical accommodation and kicked out of school. But even that clinic physician found her ineligible because of her condition. Still, the school and state maintain that she cannot be accommodated from taking that third dose of hepatitis B vaccine because her conditions are not listed by ACIP as clear contraindications. She's not alone. CHD and the attorneys with whom we work get calls like this every week. Children not only are being deprived of federally protected disability rights, but some have been badly injured after they were forced to take vaccines against medical advice so they could attend school. And physicians are harmed by this narrow reading, as some of these states are using the ACIP guidance as a cudgel to threaten doctors' licenses if states do not think a recommended exemption meets criteria. Clarification of the guidelines will protect children and ensure physician autonomy. Your timely action is needed this summer to safeguard vulnerable students. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Well, Kim, bang on time. Well done. So talk to us what happened after. And also, I think people want to know, how can they comment as well for the next one? Can just general public people make comments?
So for verbal oral comments, there's a lottery system. So several people, Karl included, from CHD put in our names into the lottery in the hopes of being chosen for commentary, but many, many people put their hat in the ring. I don't know what happens, if there's literally a hat they draw from, but it's not, but it is a lottery system. But there is a public written comment period as well before the meetings. So there's an opportunity to submit those written comments. I think, I was fortunate that I got to go first in the public comments at the end of day one. It was challenging to sit through the comments that followed mine because the vast majority of them were individuals and organizations who were just criticizing the new composition of the ACIP. And to their faces, I mean, there were some just flat out insults thrown at these people who are doing an important job and serving our country and seeking to protect our children in doing this job. So it was disheartening to hear that. And I think, one of the chief voices we've heard in criticism is the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Yeah, not particularly our friends. Karl, can you summarize that for us, your take on the ACIP? Because there's a lot of people not seeing anything good because they're pouncing on the bad and they're freaking out over the RSV, which I agree with. I mean, and also great that you've taken some aerosol out of the flu shots, but we still don't want pregnant women or anybody getting the shot. It's still not safe just because you've taken that out.
Right. So this is, in my opinion, by far the most impactful ACIP meeting there has ever been. And so even to pick out one part of it, I mean, it's all really important. I think the most important part of this ACIP meeting was the declaration that they are going to start, going to start evaluating the vaccine schedule. So they're going to be testing how safe how safe are vaccines in combination, in context, which is how children actually receive vaccines. They don't receive them one at a time usually. And that is going to be a study that is going to shatter many people's realities. At minimum, they're going to find what Dr. Brian Hooker and I found and published in the International Journal of Vaccine Theory, Practice, and Research last year, where we took 1.5 million vaccination days and looked at different combinations of the Hep B, rotavirus, and pneumococcal vaccine. And with every added vaccine, what we saw was an exponential increase in the number of sheer diseases that were afflicting these infants within 30 days of vaccination. And Polly, I'm one Ph.D. I was at that time working minimum wage because I was on a fellowship. The computer I used cost $480. In comparison, the CDC has thousands of PhDs. They have billions in discretionary funding, and they have more computer power than most countries. They're going to find the signals to be found if they do this study properly. And like I said, it is going to shatter a lot of realities around this illusion that the FDA can't approve and the CDC can't recommend a vaccine that can injure. The second really big revelation for me from this meeting may have been lost on most people. Kulldorff actually criticized the data that was being presented for the COVID vaccine efficacy. And what he was criticizing was the test negative design, which I know it sounds like fine print, but how you design your experiment is everything. And the test negative design is how most vaccine efficacy numbers are generated, and it is flawed. It is probably the worst way you can do a study, but yet still convince people it was an okay study to do. So what a test negative design is you have one clinic contact. It's the point of the person being tested, and then you ask them if they were vaccinated or unvaccinated. The problem with that is that you don't know the whole population of who is vaccinated and unvaccinated and what their proclivity to being tested negative or positive is. Now, there are two huge problems with this. One is that vaccines dysregulate the immune system. And every time I study it and every time I read about it, I see infectious diseases or diseases of infection popping up. We saw it with Hib titer when we published that paper. We saw it with that with a combination study. It's even in clinical studies. The recently approved meningococcal vaccine for meningitis had like a 270% increased chances of children getting RSV. So vaccines dysregulate the immune system. And in this case, if you give a vaccine, say a flu vaccine, that dysregulates the immune system and makes someone more likely to get sick, but not from flu, then that vaccine will have an increased measurement of efficacy with a test negative design. Another huge bias, and Polly, you've interviewed thousands, probably tens of thousands of people with about their interaction with healthcare, and they're not all the same. A test negative design sort of requires everything to be the same. When people get sick enough, they go to, prescribed going to the doctor to get tested for something. See if this sounds right. Someone who doesn't trust medicine and doesn't go to a doctor until they're absolutely really, really sick, they're going to, possibly test positive for flu. That's going to increase the vaccine efficacy measurement of the flu vaccine. On the other hand, if you have someone who's really gung-ho about medicine, does everything their doctor says, takes your flu vaccine, goes to the clinic 4 times to get a flu test, but tests negative, that's going to increase the measured efficacy of the flu vaccine. And the CDC has been measuring the efficacy with a test negative design for 20 years. And with the seasonal flu, it's only been above 50%, maybe 4 times. Last year in the 24-25 season, they measured 140,000 people and found an efficacy of 56%. However, that same season, the Cleveland Clinic under Dr. Shrestha did a prospective study where they knew who was vaccinated and who was unvaccinated, and they found that the flu vaccine for that season had a negative 27% chance negative 27% efficacy, which means people who got the flu vaccine were more likely to get the flu. Another big voting for this ACIP meeting was the RSV monoclonal antibody. It was Clesrovimab, brand name, and Flancia. They did approve it with a vote of 5-2, and Retzef Levy was one of the outspoken people who were critical of this intervention. And he noted that every time it was studied, the children in the intervention arm died at a higher rate than the children in the control arm. And the severe adverse event rate was 11.7, which is awfully high for one of the clinical trials. However, the placebo arm, it was 12.5%. So this was a study in 24 different states and 23 other countries. But when it came down to it, there were 3 children who died in the intervention arm and only 1 child who died in the placebo arm. That's not a statistically significant number, but it is pretty alarming, and you should kind of pay attention to it. And in the vein of vaccines or immunizations, causing problems with the immune system, the children who got this intervention had a 350% greater chance of an upper respiratory infection and a 63% greater chance of a lower respiratory infection. And one of the things I look at typically is febrile seizures or febrile convulsions, because that's something that once it happens, at least the first time, your parents are going to tell the doctor. And so it's going to be reported. Now, the intervention arm was twice as much as the control arm. So when you see 3 kids with febrile seizures, you would expect to see 6. We didn't. We saw 14. Febrile convulsions falls under nervous system disorders. When you see 4 in the placebo arm, you expect 8. We didn't. We saw 29. And this is why Dr. Levy and Dr. Pebsworth both voted no to approving or recommending this intervention.
But it got approved. It went through, which makes everybody sit back and think, who are these people? How can you approve something so dangerous?
Right. And I mean, further, the CDC's own working group had serious concerns that it was an underpowered study, that there were just too few infants to see the the rare events that transpire. And, you know, if this actually gets recommended by the CDC, then everyone becomes part of the clinical trial to see what the actual adverse events are. Now, ACIP is advisory. It's not definitive. It advises the CDC, and that usually falls to the director, but the CDC doesn't have a director or an acting director because Dr. Moran stepped down so she could be go through Senate confirmation. And currently, Matt Buzzelli, who's like a CDC chief of staff, is running CDC. So it may take a while for them to actually act upon the advice given by the advisory panel. One thing I was really glad to see was Martin Koldorf gave a presentation on the MMRV. That's a brand name ProQuad. So in the package insert, there is a study, and I almost didn't even look at it, honestly, because it compared children who got MMRV to children who both got MMR and the V. They're all Merck vaccines, and I'm like, how exciting can that be? That's really you're just 4 equals 3 plus 1. But it was a study of 62,000 children that 4 does not equal 3 plus 1. The febrile convulsion rate of the people who got MMRV was 120% greater, and that was statistically significant. I mean, I know that physicians don't read package inserts because you can see all the administration errors in VAERS. They're not reading the package inserts. But any physician who did read the package insert would be like, why would I ever give this to a child that is in my care when I know I'm subjecting them to twice as likely of febrile convulsions? Even though the ingredients are exactly the same, the portions are slightly different. MMRV has a 60% greater mumps component and like a 640% greater varicella component. But you know, like I said, this is an advisory panel. A lot of people are freaking out, and they have 2 concerns when they're freaking out. One is that insurance companies won't cover things that are taken off of the CDC schedule because apparently there is a law that insurance companies must cover vaccines. And, you know, the advisory panel is not where that change needs to be made. The change needs to be made either, you know, at the insurance companies or at the law, but not the people making the recommendations that are evidence-based. Another criticism is that, well, other countries follow the US. And, you know, for example, thimerosal, which I think you might play later, not every other country can afford the slightly more expensive single-dosed thimerosal, flu vaccine. But that's really weird logic. It's like sitting on an EPA meeting and saying, well, we're not going to recommend people drink clean drinking water because not every place has access to clean drinking water, but we still want them to drink water. So we're not going to recommend it. I mean, some of the logics that are involved in trying to push down vaccine skepticism are really hairy.
Thank you, Karl. I know we're out of time, but I just want to ask you both this, Kim. What can we, the people, do to stop? It's so frustrating because what we want to see, all of us mothers with vaccinated children, is that the whole schedule goes because we've seen the health of the unvaccinated. So it's frustrating for people that, like, we've got Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and now he's going to get up there and say no more vaccines because they're all unsafe and they're all dangerous. But obviously he can't do that because apparently he has to do the science first. And we, the people, our children, our injuries apparently don't matter. So what do we do? Scream louder? Contact Children's Health Defence? What can we do? Because for every time that an RSV, I've seen on the mummy groups already, they're saying, well, if Bobby says the RSV is safe, no, he didn't say that. ACIP said that. They approved it. So do you see the mess we're in? Kim?
100%. And I want to go back to Karl's point that ACIP isn't, you know, the first word in ACIP is advisory. They are not the final decision maker on this. And I think that we can keep up pressure, you know, we want to hear from people. We at Children's Health Defense want to hear from people on this. I encourage people to reach out, to their elected representatives and reach out through whatever channels are available to reach the Centers for Disease Control and the ACIP to make their voices heard. And I think that it's very important also, Karl mentioned the pressure on who's going to pay for these. Whether or not a vaccine is safe doesn't depend on whether or not there's insurance funding for a vaccine. The vaccine should be safe or not safe, and decisions made based on the actual safety and efficacy of a product, not on whether someone's going to pay for it. So there was a lot of discussion about what happens if you don't recommend a vaccine and therefore it's not available, particularly for poor children or lower income children through the Vaccines for Children program. But again, this isn't about who pays for the product. It's about whether a product is safe and we should be administering it to our children. That's the first question. ACIP can't control what insurance companies do or what Medicaid does or what any other payer program does. What they can do is look at the safety and efficacy, and we hope that over time that we start to see, and I think with the thimerosal issue, they listened to Lynn Redwood. They heard what Lynn had to say. She had an incredibly eloquent presentation. And those are the issues that ACIP needs to focus on. And, Dr. Kuldorf's discussion of MMRV, the ProQuad, versus, as Karl said, MMR and V, is an important one too. And these are issues that need to be elevated and need to be talked about. And AAP yelling and screaming that thimerosal is safe, which is a scientifically disproven statement, just undermines and underscores that people are losing trust, have lost trust in entities like the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Yeah, well, look, thank you both. I think we definitely have to get you both back on because we could talk for another hour on this. We've got lots more to cover, but we are actually out of time. So we've got to hand the show over now to Isabella Yon with Mothers to Be. But Mack Rosenberg and Karl Jablonowski, thank you for everything that you do. We really, truly appreciate it, the breakdown being here today.
Thank you, Polly.
Okay, we'll hand it over now to Mothers to Be.
Good morning, CHD. Welcome to our Mothers to Be segment where we chat all things preconception, pregnancy and birth. My name is Isabella Yon and today I'm here with Jonathan Tommy, who is going to be chatting to us all things gut health and specifically why this is so important when thinking about conception and pregnancy. So hi, Jonathan. Thanks so much for being here today.
Morning, Isabella. How are you?
Well, thank you. So Jonathan, I know you're an expert on all things gut. Do you mind just kicking us off with a brief overview about what the gut even is and why do we need to care about it? Why is it so important?
Okay, so I think personally the gut is the most important organ in the whole body. It's absolutely imperative for optimizing health, and this is obviously preconception all the way through pregnancy and beyond. So looking after the gut is really important. We also have to remember that it is an outside organ within us. You can actually blow air from your mouth through to the anus. It's massive in terms of surface area, probably the size of a tennis court if you unravel it. It's a 30-foot length tube. And it's absolutely imperative not only for the absorption of nutrients, having digested healthy organic foods that you're putting into your body. It's also massively important for the immune system and the established microbiome, which we'll talk a little bit later on about. Also a massive organ for excretion. We've got to remember that the liver will detoxify the blood system and dump everything in the gut for elimination. So it really does look after the systemic aspects of our health by providing sufficient levels of nutrients. Of course, that's if you're consuming good organic foods in sufficient quantities. And obviously eliminating the many toxins that the body is exposed to in this life that we commonly live today, from foods and things that you put on the body, household goods, environmental pollutants, pesticides, insecticides. everything really is important for the gut to look after. And without good gut health, we have no health. So Hippocrates was a wonderful holistic healer, 450 BC. And he said that all disease begins in the gut. So obviously a man of his stature and intellect recognized that people obviously in those days with poor gut health went on to develop chronic disease and illness, and really did focus his treatments on supporting the gut through good nutrition and a holistic way of healing them.
Yeah, wonderful. And so let's talk about, how do you know if you have something up with your gut? Are there any symptoms that you could be looking for? How do you know if it's like an area that you need to focus on?
So I think when you look at actual stool, there's a wonderful chart called the Bristol stool chart, which will look at the formation and the consistency and the coloration of your stool. And everybody should really have a look at the Bristol stool chart to see if they're actually passing good, healthy stools. Obviously, diarrhea, constipation, abdominal gas, IBS, Crohn's, colitis, chronic fatigue syndrome. There are many associated issues with the gut. And as Hippocrates found initially, that a lot of illness and diseases are actually as a result of poor gut health. So symptomology is important, firstly, to look at. And then, of course, we need to address the causative factors there. And we must remember that being the outside tube within us, this is where the body really is exposed to many pathogens and toxins. So the foodstuffs that we consume are probably riddled with parasites and viral cells and bacterial cells. And the body's immune system isn't systemic, i.e., it's not just the white cells that circulate through the lymphatic and the blood system. It's secretory IgA, which is 70 to 80% of our total immune system surrounding the gut. So that's how important the gut is. And this is why it's so important to really have a healthy gut and a healthy immune system protecting it, because without that, and it's called the enteric nervous system. So the gut and the brain cells during embryonic development divide into the two. So you have the central nervous system controlled by the brain, but then the enteric nervous system, which surrounds the gut, and there are 100 million neurons surrounding the gut, which is actually bigger than the brain itself. So this is how important it is to really look after the gut and protect it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And what kind of things could impact gut health? Is this something that everyone, is exposed to, things that could impact gut health? What should we be trying to avoid? What should we be looking for?
So I think when you look at what actually goes into the gut, you've got to look at foods that are detrimental, and gluten especially. It has two little peptides in it. One is called gliadin and one is called glutenin. And gliadin especially can induce chronic gut health problems, because what happens when you consume gluten is that a compound called zonulin is secreted by the gut. And that increases the porosity or the permeability of the gut membrane. And we don't want that, because you then have undigested peptides going through into the blood system, triggering allergenic responses or food intolerance responses. You have obviously an increase in toxins going through the gut wall into the blood system, which is again going to increase levels of toxicity in your body. And of course, pathogens, what you don't want is those to go in, because that then initiates the systemic immune response to those things that pass through the gut wall. So it's really important that the gut epithelium, it's a single layer of cells between the outside, i.e. the inside of the tube, and the blood system. So if that is damaged in any way, and you can see here the leaky gut syndrome, it's where the intestinal lining is broken, those tight junctions between the cells, which should be really close together, open up to allow these toxins and pathogens and food peptides through. So managing and looking after gut health is absolutely imperative.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I think we hear a lot about leaky gut syndrome, but it's interesting. I don't think a lot of people actually know what it is. So that slide is definitely super helpful. So let's hone in a little bit on pregnancy. Why is the gut so important when you are thinking about conception and pregnancy?
Okay, so what we have to remember is the gut really does provide the mum with all of the nutrients that she will need during her pregnancy and beyond, but also what the baby is going to need during its development in the womb. So we have to look at, number one, selection of the correct food. So organic food is massively important. A toxic-free diet, so remove all of the additives, the preservatives, the colorants, the flavorings, and be as natural as you possibly can with your selection of diet. I'm a firm believer with this gluten issue inducing leaky gut. To avoid gluten. And gluten, as you know, is found in wheat predominantly, but there are very similar proteins in barley and rye and oats. So I would suggest eliminating all of those from the diet, because what we don't want is for the leaky gut to be initiated during conception or pregnancy, because as I said, that will then increase the risk of toxic exposure to the baby during the development in the womb, but also allergens and other pathogens passing through into the blood system. So looking after the gut, as I said, is massively important. And we have to remember that the microbiome, which is the collection of commensal bacteria, good bacteria in the gut, and there are 10 times more bacteria in the gut than we have human cells making up our entire body. So, and they weigh about 6.5 to 7 kilograms. So the commensal, or the good guys in the gut, are really important, because there is evidence now through research that the baby isn't actually sterile in the womb. There are traces of bacterial exposure in the amniotic fluid and obviously in the first fecal passing of the baby. But the mother has to, during childbirth, deliver the baby, and that is the first real exposure that the baby picks up beneficial bacteria from the birth canal. So making sure that the microbiome is well established and healthy during your whole pregnancy is massively important. And it's not as easy as just putting in a few probiotics or eating some sauerkraut. You really have to look at what foods are going to be beneficial to support the microbiome and how you can best achieve that. But fundamentally, what we have to remember is that the food selections and the avoidance of toxicity is so important, but also secretory IgA, which is the 70 to 80% of our total immunity surrounding the gut. That's absolutely important to look after that. So it is our first line of defense. So any bacteria that come down, or any pathogen coming down into the gut through food, is surrounded and pounced upon by secretory IgA. So what it does is bind and cover pathogenic bacteria in mucus. So that stops that potential pathogen adhering to the gut epithelium and passing through that very small single layer of cells into the blood system. It's also the gatekeeper for our microbiome. So that will decide what is good and what is bad. And obviously, if secretory IgA is low, then you have a higher incidence of pathogens coming in and getting established on the lining of the gut wall. So without sufficient secretory IgA, your gut is really exposed to pathogens, as is your systemic system, because if you have insufficient levels of secretory IgA, you're going to have these bad guys passing into your blood system, which is then going to create inflammatory responses, not good for you, not good for the baby. And obviously, if your immune system is suppressed at any point during that time, then these things have the opportunity to create infection.
Yeah, and what can we be doing? How do you support secretory IgA in your body?
So secretory IgA is an antibody that you can look after, and we have a slide on this, which is looking at the type of nutrients that are very essential to support that, along with certain foods. So the foods, specifically glycans and prebiotics, such as apples, asparagus, banana, carrot, the list is there. These create oligosaccharides, which are then converted by good bacteria into short-chain fatty acids, which will feed and supply the essential nutrients for secretory IgA development. You've got other nutrients to support it, such as L-glutamine, which is an amino acid, Saccharomyces boulardii, a specific type of fungi, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K, vitamin E, C, phosphatidylcholine, glutathione, glycine, zinc, selenium, colostrum, omega-3s, and aloe vera and bone broth. So when we are looking at nutrition, focus really on how do we support secretory IgA and how do we support gut health, because that is massively important. We have to also remember that the gut cells are the fastest turning over cells in the whole body. And if they have insufficient foods, they're not going to turn over as fast as we would like them to. So, for example, the small intestinal epithelial cells rely very heavily on an amino acid called L-glutamine. And the large intestinal cells rely very much on butyrate, which is a short-chain fatty acid produced by the bacteria in the gut as a result of digesting and fermenting soluble and insoluble fiber. So provision of both soluble and insoluble fiber is essential for large gut health. And obviously the microbiome is going to be very dependent on that as well. That's very much dependent on the type of foods that you consume in order to provide them with sufficient nutrients to colonize and grow across the whole gut epithelium.
Yeah, thank you. And so what about women who have known gut issues and are starting to think about conception? Would you recommend that they wait a little bit and work on restoring their gut before trying for a baby? And if so, what to do to restore the gut to optimal health before conception?
Okay, so I think one has to look at, there are a lot of diagnostic tests that one can do. You can look at your nutrient status, number one. And if, for example, you find that you're deficient in many nutrients, one has to really then look at the type of foods that you're selecting, but then how well the gut is digesting those foods. Because if digestion is impaired as a result potentially of low hydrochloric acid or gastric secretions in the stomach, or a lower than optimal level of pancreatic enzymes released by the pancreas, then digestion is going to be a problem. If there's inflammatory issues going on in the gut, then you may have these little finger-like projections called villi, which increase the absorptive area in the small intestine. If those are truncated in any way, then obviously absorption isn't going to be optimal as a result of that. So certainly food selections are really important, but also identification of possible symptoms that you may have associated with poor gut function. Is your stool sufficiently dark in color? Is the consistency correct? Are you passing regular stools? Because all of these are massively important, and you may not know you're living with gut issues. But to really read about this, and we have a great section on the Mothers to Be website on this, so they can really focus on supporting the gut. And it is absolutely essential to start way before you even conceive a child, because there are a lot of mums out there that think, oh, I need to detoxify and get rid of these heavy metals that potentially are in my body. But of course, if you do that and your gut has intestinal permeability, the liver will obviously strain and clear these from the blood system and then pass them into the gut via the gallbladder for excretion with the stool. But if the gut wall is impervious or leaky, then these toxins are just going to pass back across the gut wall and then taken back to the liver for recirculation. So the issue is, of course, it's fundamental to look after the most important organ in your body. And then once that is corrected and you have a good established microbiome, which is essential for the baby. And again, another great advantage of breastfeeding, because human milk oligosaccharides, and oligosaccharides are short sugar complexes between 3 and 10 sugars together. So important, especially for establishing the initial microbiome in the baby. And that, of course, leads to then greater immunity, a greater selection and colonization of the beneficial bacteria. So you're giving baby a perfect start with establishing its microbiome, but also supporting its immune system as it develops, especially in the first 2 years. And breast milk, of course, is wonderful, not only for provision of maternal antibodies, but obviously all of the nutrients essential to that baby as it develops. So going back to the question, yes, imperative, let's get the gut health restored and optimized before you even think about getting pregnant or conceiving. So as I said, look at foods, especially foods high in soluble and insoluble fibers. You've got fermented foods such as sauerkraut and kefir, kombucha, and all of these other things. Wonderful to have that. And of course, other helpful ingredients and nutrients: inulin, glucosamine, omega-3 fatty acids, vitamins A, E, and C, and foods rich in glycans such as the asparagus and bananas and carrots and celery. These are all foods very high in insoluble and soluble fiber, essential for that microbiome to develop and to be healthy, kept healthy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And I know you briefly mentioned it, but where can mums go to find more information about the gut and
So under the preconception chapter on mothers-to-be, that would be a great start to look at. And obviously looking at finding a functional and integrative practitioner. So consults are really important for those who are struggling to identify why they're dealing with certain gut-related symptoms. Go and see a functional integrative specialist such as Isabella. And it's really important that those are identified and diagnostic tests can be run. So if you just give a stool sample, you can find out so much from that, the nutrient status that you're in, any inflammatory issues such as calprotectin are there. You can do intestinal permeability tests to look at how healthy your gut wall is, your gut membrane, and if there's any porosity there. So to really look at all of these things and to make sure what you're doing is absolutely correct for you, because you'll be reading lots of information. Oh, this is helpful, this is helpful. But the question is, what is helpful for you? So an individualized protocol is absolutely essential. And I would urge and recommend every mother to be who is looking to conceive to really get the gut sorted out first. Establish that it's not leaky. Give it great food, give it great nutrition, give it the foods that it needs, and support that microbiome, because that is the most essential thing outside of breast milk for your baby once you have it.
Amazing. Jonathan, thank you so much for all your wisdom. I think this has been really enlightening, and definitely has for me, so I'm sure it has for many mothers-to-be also. So I appreciate your time, and thank you all for tuning in. If you have any more questions about gut health or anything like that, feel free to send us a message via the Mothers-to-Be website or on social media. We are at Mothers-to-Be. Thanks so much.
My name is Dr. Elizabeth Rogers.
And what kind of a doctor are you?
I am now a health and longevity doctor, but I'm also a Harvard-trained epidemiologist and researcher.
So, how old were you when you took the HPV Gardasil shot?
I was 18, a freshman in college, and I'll never forget, I was trained by the Western healthcare system, so I believed in everything that I was taught, and I'll never forget my mom calling me one day while I was walking to class told me that she got a letter in the mail from my university saying that it was required that I go get an HPV shot. And so I went running to student health, pulled up my sleeve, and that's how it all started.
And how many of those shots did you get, the Gardasil?
The Gardasil, I believe there was a series that was
3 maybe?
Yes, and I know for a fact that I would have completed the series because, you know, that's what I thought you were supposed to do.
So you're an obedient person?
Yes, I was, but I'm not anymore.
So what made you think that the Gardasil was a problem? Did you feel ill?
I didn't think it was a problem at all until, honestly, more recently in my lifetime. So right after I got the series of shots, I started getting extremely sick every 3 to 4 weeks. I was bedridden in my dorm room at student health on IV antibiotics because I was that incredibly sick. And as soon as I'd overcome it, the cycle would start itself over again. And I lived through this vicious cycle for years until I was 23 years old when I had a near-death experience. And then I spent the next decade after that battling chronic illness. During that time, I was training as a doctoral student in epidemiology and doing extensive research. And my near-death experience is what really opened my eyes.
Wow.
So what really happened was I had kidney stones, massive kidney stones, which is extremely rare for a 23-year-old young female adult. Kidney stones are typically most common in older adult men. So it was a rare case to begin with, and nobody could figure out why I had this or what the problem was. But what really caused the near-death experience was there was a urologist who was supposed to do a laser lithotripsy procedure on me to remove the kidney stones. But instead he poked a bunch of holes in my ureter wall, left me bleeding internally, and did not tell me about it. And so I went into septic shock and had a doctor save my life after he found my pelvic floor full of blood and urine.
Do you remember anything about being nearly dead?
Yeah.
What happened?
I remember all of it. I remember knowing I was dying and not knowing what else to do. There is a story, I call it my angel story, that is what happened to me right before I had my life-saving surgery. I said goodbye to my entire family because time had passed. After the surgery, the doctor who did this to me did not tell us about it. So we had no idea. My family was watching me just decline in the hospital. And I still believe to this day, this was all this entire series of events was triggered by the fact that I went and got that series of vaccinations. But I didn't connect the dots until years later. So while I was going through this time frame in the hospital where the original surgeon had said, within 72 hours, you're gonna pass your stones, you'll feel like $1 million and walk out of here. And I remember thinking, that sounds great. Except 72 hours later, and then days beyond that, I was suffering, declining, and I had shown no signs of passing any stones whatsoever, and they could not get this surgeon to answer the calls or pages. So nobody could understand what was going on. My parents had to file a grievance with the hospital where I was being treated, which took days to process because unfortunately we're all subject to the insurance system here in the United States, and it's a nightmare. And it was divine timing. I have no doubt about that. The day that my parents' grievance was accepted, they put a different urologist on my case who rushed me in for a CT scan, said, "You're in septic shock," and told my parents and I that that it was a 1 in a million shot that I would survive that situation. And so that if that I needed to say goodbye. And so I remember saying goodbye to my parents, in particular to my brother, because when that was happening, the surgeon who almost killed me decided that he was going to show up and actually pushed my father up against the wall and said, "You must not know who you're dealing with," and threatened my family. And all I remember is knowing that I was extremely close to dying and that I just needed help. And I remember looking at my brother and saying, I need help.
Is your brother older than you?
No, I'm the oldest of my siblings. Thank you. So after that, they rushed me to an emergency procedure. I was given a palliative care nurse because the assumption was that I was not going to make it. So she was just there to basically hold my hand and be supportive until the end. And we were outside the elevators on our way down to the operating room. And there was a woman standing about 20 feet away from me. And I remember being angry because when you feel that sick, you know, I didn't want anyone to see me like that or look at me. And before I could have another thought, she was right next to my bedside. She asked the transport team taking me to the OR if she could give me something. And I was gripping the bed sheets, and all I remember is feeling myself separate from my physical body. So I was in a really strange state of consciousness. And this woman put her hands on my hands and leaned down and said, I just need you to know that everything's going to be okay. And when she stood up, I opened up my hands for the first time. I let go of the bed sheets. I was just gripping them because I was in constant pain. And there was a tiny little angel pin in my hand. And to this day, I have no idea how it got there. And when I looked up to say thank you to her, she was gone. And to be honest, I thought I hallucinated the entire thing because I was on so many IV drugs to deal with the pain and prepping me for surgery. So I asked the transport team if this was all real, and they told me it was. And I asked if they could take the angel pin with us. And somehow, some way, against all the odds, I woke up on the other side, still here on planet Earth, and that angel pin was pinned on my pillow. And I knew in that moment that I'd only survived for one reason, and it was because I'm here to serve. And that's all I've cared about ever since that day. And I remember all of it. And I'm actually about to write my first book, and I'm going to write about part of this story.
And what are you doing now? You are really helping people.
I hope so.
You are. Talk about it. Tell people what you're doing.
So now I'm a health and longevity doctor, and I have my own practice. After that near-death experience, I went through a decade and beyond of battling every chronic illness you could possibly imagine, and not just physical, emotional, mental. I battled PTSD, anxiety, depression, every GI issue I was diagnosed with, you name it, and they told me I had it, every label. They told me I had IBS and SIBO and candida overgrowth and slow colonic transit and chronic constipation. And I bounced from doctor to specialist and naturopath and back again, because all I wanted was to feel healthy and whole. I just wanted to feel whole, mind, body, and spirit. And nobody was doing anything except offering me a piece of the puzzle, another prescription, and that wasn't good enough for me. And so I was on this quest to find the one doctor who was going to get it, who was going to help me put the pieces of the puzzle together and help me find wholeness. And I never found them, because eventually I realized that I'd been staring her in the mirror all along. And all this time, ever since, I've worked with dozens of women mostly, helping them find the root causes of their health issues and walk a pathway to heal that's very individualized, because health isn't one size fits all. And what health is to each and every one of us is something different. And I'm really tired of all of us being told that there's some picture of health that we're supposed to be striving to achieve. Because to me, what being optimally healthy and well means is feeling whole. And that happens when your mind, body, and spirit are connected and aligned. And the way in which each of us finds that connection and alignment, the way in which we all feel and find wholeness is going to be different for every person on planet Earth. And so my mission now is just to help anybody that wants to feel whole again, whatever that means to you, because it doesn't matter what it means to me.
Beautiful. Is there anything else you want to say to the people?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that no matter where you are, what you're going through, what you're going to go through, what I think it's important to think about is that your natural state of existence is being healthy, whole, balanced, and well. And that doesn't mean that you're completely and permanently free from setbacks and challenges. So to me, it's just my job to help you find that connection and realign mind, body, and spirit so you can just exist from that natural state and trust in yourself, because you know your body, your heart, your soul better than anybody else, no matter what anyone else makes you think or feel. And there's a lot of crap out there in the world, especially on social media, and anything that makes you feel self-doubt or uncertainty is something that it's your intuition or inner voice's way of telling you to just walk a different direction, find a different path, because there are a lot of well-meaning practitioners and health coaches and people like me out here in the world who have the best interest of your health and well-being at heart.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Telling everybody what amazing testimony.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.